Well, hi there and welcome back to the Drawing Database. Professor Marc Leone. Today we're going to look at and spend 15 minutes with the drawings of one of my favorite French painters, the French Romanticist painter Eugène Delacroix, born in 1798 and died in 1863. So if you are ever in Paris, you probably will spend a little time at the Louvre, and probably maybe a lot of time at the Louvre. If you have a little time to spend, maybe 3-4 hours, then I would highly suggest visiting the French painting section, especially the area of Delacroix, Géricault, David, and Ingres, and others in that particular area. So you see some of the best French painting in the 18th and early 19th centuries to get a good handle on French politics of the time, revolution, and beyond. So I think you'll be well rewarded. Moving to the drawings, we see a lovely active gestural sketch. Look at the movement through the horses and riders, of the action of the gesture. I love the pulling of the horse hooves and almost like a jump. See the tucking in through here, and then we also see the turn of the horse, the two riders, in through here, and then on top. So here Delacroix really exploring the positioning of active horse and riders, almost a little bit of the pose of the King Sardinopoulos in the death of Sardinopoulos. So here again the drawing looks to be in ink, heightened in hatching in ink, or maybe even in chalk, but we see some cross hatching. But what's really important here is the graceful, flowy, loose line quality that Delacroix captured not only in his drawings but also in his painting style, and opened up a looser, expressive style in Romanticism. These chalk studies look like pastel-type chalk studies were done in preparatory efforts, exploratory efforts for the massively large painting, The Death of King Sardinopoulos, that you can see in the Louvre. It's massive. It's mural size, and it's the story of a vain king losing his kingdom and destroying everything around him, to signify kind of a vainglorious attempt to go down and die at his own hands rather than his enemies' hands that are approaching at the gate. Here we see lovely technique of some very incisive kinds of line, almost stylus kind of line work, perhaps in ink pen here, some linear contouring elements of head structure and profile. We see the same thing in a little bit of the line work, maybe in heightened chalk here. And then we see almost a painterly effort to throw in and buff down or rub down or stomp down pastel tone, both the Caucasian flesh tones that we see here, the African flesh tones that we see here as well, and then also the hair coloring and stylings to give a sense of a painterly approach in through drawing to do preparatory studies for the death of Sardinopoulos. Really flowy, graceful, somewhat gestural, and just well controlled into the structure of the composition or the figures, and almost effortless in their loose kind of control. Lovely, just beautiful gestural kind of quality through the poses there. Here we get another image of a different pose in the same kind of materials and techniques, and also for the same narrative of the death of Sardinopoulos, or allegory. We see a more tortured figure that's going to be handled by one of Sardinopoulos's warriors in the throes of death. Here we see Delacroix's lovely lay-in sketch technique, his gestural line we can see in these areas. The hands are so delicate. Let's pull in and to see how he rendered that with a real kind of a graceful, elegant contouring line on top, and then downward through the fingers, through a very linear approach to the fingers coming down and in and finishing them over, and a little bit of heightened, almost alabaster kind of very fair skin, and we get a little bit darker over here with the figure and the buttocks turning. Good control of cast shadows, elegant opening up of the calf down to the Achilles heel through there. Let's pull back in a little bit. And then some toning or tinting, if you will, with painterly-like technique of dry media, of dry chalk, navy, dark navy, cobalt, midnight blues, a little bit of raven hair, and again you see the gesture coming through. This in and of itself could be a lovely style for an artist, for a looser lay-in and a looser painterly approach. Here's a quick study of a male figure, perhaps an engineer or private in the French army, but we do know it's a male portrait. We have a slight tilt of the head leaning this way, just slightly to give a little bit more character. It's almost an effortless rendering in what looks to be perhaps graphite or maybe black chalk. So mostly a quick kind of contour lining we see here, and then of course a little bit of rendering in the forms and features of the head, the hair, and the neck to give a simple finish to this sketch. Some of my personal favorite renderings from Delacroix are these very loose ideational or preparatory ideational gestural sketches done in a fountain pen, with not only the blisteringly active movement of horse and rider in this diagonal kind of compositional way to really give force and emotion to the figures, but it's also what he can suggest in a very kind of simple means, the gestural quality of the rendering of this rider and the flaming sort of activity of the power of the individual horses in this figure pushed over to the side here in the buttocks of the figure. Notice the lovely control of line weight and also gesture. This is kind of seminal tour de force in gesture drawing to get some heavier, thicker lines added on top of these lighter, thinner exploratory lines to really get at a sense of some depth and some three-dimensional volume even in a gestural sketch. And I love here in this area the cross contouring to even get a sense of the three-dimensional, and we see that here as well, thinking in 3D even in a preparatory, very quick gestural sketch. Here we have the death of Christ on the cross, or one of the thieves, if you will, that was attendant to Christ, the three that were hung on the cross. We see here a lovely execution of the spirit of the gesture, right? The hung figure, the reclining head, right, and then down through the front of the body. There's your relative gesture there, but I think even important in this drawing is the hatching technique that we see on the body that he used, done primarily here in chalk. We can see the scratchier kind of scraping of the chalk material on the slightly toned paper, so we know it's chalk. Notice again these marks that really don't appear on the model. I start to tell my students in their second time through figure drawing in my intermediate drawing classes is to start coming up with or paying attention to cross contouring, where we get a series of hatched marks that move us around the forms that are not necessarily, really are not on the model at all. So we have to study drawing and study how artists of the past have used this technique and how that can heighten our awareness of turning forms somewhat arbitrarily with the use of cross-contouring line, and then of course the wonderful use of appropriate darks in areas under the chin, the mouth, the hair, and then we see the line work here of moving through a darker line, somewhat lighter, darker, somewhat lighter, and the involvement of using line weight variation, width, thickness, and length, and also value. Line can have a value from a darker line to a lighter line, and tapered from very as dark as you can make the value that you have to a very lighter line, broken line, back again and wispily through. So that kind of movement really gives us a sense of what can be had with drawing a little belly button in through here, up and over onto the cloth, loin cloth, and down over and around. So I'm drawing this area in through here. That is important to get line weight variation. Also thought I would include this lovely pastel sketch of a sunset or sunrise. We don't quite know, but I'm going to determine this to be a sunset. So a little off from where the sun would be, or the sun is already set, probably somewhere down and over through here. And just the lovely use of color blending and mixing, slight grayed lavender tones against these lavenders, mixed in with the oranges. We have the cerulean sky, a little bit of the cobalt structure, and maybe a touch of the black, just slightly mixed in through here with some browns. Very painterly, active, gestural, and abstract to make a lovely chalk drawing of a horizon line with some dark greens, viridian types with maybe some black, a little bit of blue, and some olive tones against these wonderful open areas of light. And then a fairly dark, 7s and 6s in the value range of the light and the quality of the darks with the horizon line and this open landscape. Notice compositionally he leaves much more of the sky. The sky is more important than the ground, so we could even really call this a skyscape, if you will. And then lastly, one of the wonderful qualities that we get to see in some of the surviving sketches and drawings by as many artists as we can through antiquity and contemporary artists is their ideational preparatory work, which I really like to see, especially artists that I admire or have a lot of respect for, how they came up with ideas, discovered ideas. So in this technique, what we see is probably chalk throughout, used with more of a tip, and we see the inclusion of what could be only be read as a cacophony of people in some kind of tussle, perhaps in the sky, cloud-like forms. Perhaps there's an indication of riders. There's begins to be a thinking, an idea, ideational creation, compositional. We have an open kind of rounded oval where the focal point directs to in this darker space and through here. And we see this kind of drawing taken a hold of in contemporary, sometimes postmodern drawing, where it becomes an end in of itself. Gestural, painterly, the application of blended tones to give slightly an atmospheric form, and then darker line weight that comes up on top and actually encourages a focal point as well as issues of three-dimensional depth as these areas draw somewhat closer than more of these lighter line, active line work, weighted lines that tend to push the atmosphere deeper in the background or middle ground as well. So there you go, Delacroix, one of my favorites painters of that time of the French Romanticism era. Take care. Bye-bye.